President Trump just announced something significant last night during his State of the Union address, and I want to make sure you understand exactly what was said, what it actually means, and what the realistic path forward looks like. Because this announcement is already generating a lot of excitement and a lot of confusion simultaneously, and I think there are some important details that most people are either missing or misunderstanding. So let's walk through it carefully together. First, some context about the address itself. Last night's State of the Union came in at over 100 minutes, making it the longest State of the Union address in American history. There was a lot in it. But the moment that has people talking this morning, the thing that landed in my inbox multiple times before I even had my coffee, was the announcement of a $1,000 match for working Americans who contribute to a retirement plan. Let me play that clip so you can hear it directly from the president himself, because I think hearing it in his own words is important before we get into the analysis. So right there, what President Trump announced is a proposal for the federal government to match worker contributions to retirement accounts up to $1,000 per year. This would specifically target working Americans who currently do not have access to an employer-sponsored retirement plan with matching contributions. He framed it as giving these workers access to the same type of retirement benefit that every federal government employee already receives. And the reaction in the room was striking. Both Republicans and Democrats stood up and applauded. That is not something you see every night during a State of the Union, and it matters for reasons I'm going to get into in a moment. But first, I want to be clear about what this is and what it is not, because I have already seen some messaging out there framing this as a $1,000 check going to every working American, and that is not quite accurate. This is not a direct payment. It is a matching contribution to a retirement account. The distinction matters enormously. To receive the $1,000 federal match, you would have to put in $1,000 yourself first. You contribute $1,000, the government matches it with $1,000, and now you have $2,000 per year going into a retirement account on your behalf. If you cannot afford to put in the $1,000 yourself, you do not receive the match. That is fundamentally different from a stimulus check or a dividend payment that arrives in your bank account, regardless of what you do. This is a retirement savings incentive, and understanding it as such is essential for evaluating whether it would actually benefit you personally. Now, let me walk through the math on what this could actually grow into over time, because this is where the proposal gets genuinely interesting and where I think the long-term vision starts to come into focus. If you and the federal government are each putting in $1,000 per year, you have $2,000 annually going into your retirement account. At a conservative 6% average annual return over 20 years, that $2,000 per year grows to approximately $73,000. At 8% average annual return over the same 20 years, you are looking at around $91,000. At a 10% average annual return, that number climbs to roughly $115,000. And remember, of that total, you only personally contributed $20,000 over those 20 years. The rest is a combination of the federal match and compound growth over time. That is a genuinely significant outcome for someone who otherwise might have nothing in a retirement account. For a working American who currently has zero retirement savings and no employer match, a federal program that effectively doubles their contribution from day one and then lets compound interest do its work over decades could be transformational. The president mentioned that the typical 401k balance is up by at least $30,000 since he took office due to strong stock market performance, but then immediately acknowledged the uncomfortable reality sitting right next to that good news. Half of all working Americans still do not have access to a retirement plan with employer matching contributions. Half. We're talking about 80 to 85 million working people who are being left out of one of the most powerful wealth-building tools available in the American financial system. They are not left out because they made bad choices. They are left out because their employers simply do not offer it. And when your employer does not offer a matching retirement plan, you are at a massive structural disadvantage compared to workers who do have that benefit, even if your salary is identical. The compound growth that matching contributions unlock over a career is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in retirement wealth. People without access to it fall behind in ways that are very difficult to overcome through individual savings alone. This proposal is essentially the federal government stepping in to provide that match for the people the private employer system has left behind. And philosophically, regardless of where you fall politically, that framing has broad appeal. It is not a handout. It requires you to participate and contribute. It rewards the act of saving. And it directly addresses a structural inequality in the American retirement system that has real consequences for tens of millions of workers. Which probably explains why both sides of the aisle were on their feet when the president announced it. Now let's talk about the bigger picture context, because I think understanding where this fits into the administration's broader economic vision makes it more meaningful. President Trump has been consistent throughout 2026 in saying that this year is going to be about affordability and about giving Americans financial relief. He has also been talking for months about not wanting Americans to be entirely dependent on Social Security for their retirement security, particularly given the well-documented funding challenges the program faces. The Social Security Trust Fund, based on current projections, is looking at a potential depletion point around 2033 if Congress does not act. At that point, without legislative intervention, benefits could be reduced to roughly 75 to 80% of their scheduled level. That is not a comfortable situation for anyone currently planning their retirement around Social Security as their primary income source. The Trump accounts that the president rolled out earlier, the $1,000 accounts for children born between now and 2028 or so, are one piece of a broader strategy of building alternative retirement wealth outside of Social Security. The math on those is compelling over very long time frames. A $1,000 investment at birth, left untouched until age 65, could grow to over $500,000 depending on market performance. But the obvious limitation is that 65 years is an extremely long horizon. For someone who is 50 or 55 years old today, that program does absolutely nothing for their retirement situation. This new proposal, the Working American Retirement Match, addresses a much more immediate time frame. If you are 40 years old and you start putting $1,000 a year into a retirement account with a $1,000 federal match, you have 25 to 30 years of compound growth ahead of you. That is a very different and much more actionable calculation than waiting 65 years for a child's account to mature. Let me be honest about what we do not yet know, because there is a lot of important information that was not part of last night's announcement, and that matters enormously for evaluating whether this becomes reality. The president gave no specifics on how this program would be structured. He did not explain the eligibility criteria in detail beyond the general framing of working Americans without access to employer matches. He did not address income limits, which would be a natural policy tool for targeting the benefit toward the people who need it most. He did not explain the administrative mechanism through which the match would actually be delivered. And most importantly, for those wondering if this is going to happen, he gave no legislative timeline other than indicating 2027 as the year this would be implemented. On the funding question, the early reporting I have seen suggests the most likely source being discussed is tariff revenue, which is the same pool of money the administration has pointed to for other proposed programs, like the $2,000 dividend payments. If you look at the numbers, approximately 160 to 170 million Americans are currently working. If every single one of them opted into this program and put in the full $1,000 to receive the match, the total federal cost would be around $160 to $170 billion per year. That is a significant number, but not an incomprehensible one in the context of a federal budget measured in trillions. And realistically, not everyone would participate. If 50% of eligible workers opted in, you are looking at a cost of around $80 billion per year. That is a number that has been cited as potentially manageable within projected tariff revenue streams, though obviously the tariff situation has been evolving rapidly, and those revenue projections are less certain than they were a few weeks ago, given the Supreme Court ruling and subsequent developments. There is also the critical question of what Congress does with this, and here is where the bipartisan applause in the room last night becomes genuinely meaningful, rather than just a feel-good moment. President Trump cannot unilaterally create this program. It requires legislation, Congress has to pass a bill, and the history of retirement savings reform legislation in this country has actually been somewhat bipartisan in recent years. Secure Act 2.0, which passed in 2022, expanded retirement savings access in a number of ways and attracted support from both parties. The underlying concept of helping more Americans save for retirement has historically been an area where political agreement is possible even in an otherwise deeply divided legislative environment. The fact that members of both parties were visibly enthusiastic about this proposal last night suggests there may be a genuine legislative path here, which is more than you can say about many of the proposals that get floated during State of the Union addresses. The president's framing of this as a 2027 implementation also suggests something important about the political calculation. If Congress needs to pass this legislation in 2026 for it to take effect in 2027, that puts the vote squarely in the middle of a midterm election year. Every House member is up for re-election in November. A vote in favor of a popular retirement savings expansion program, one that received bipartisan applause at the State of the Union, is a much easier vote politically than a lot of what Congress is asked to do. And a vote against it becomes harder to explain to constituents who are worried about retirement security and have seen half of all working Americans left out of employer-matching programs for decades. The timing is not accidental. This is a politically sophisticated proposal designed to create exactly the kind of electoral dynamic where passing it is easier than blocking it. Now I want to step back and put this into context with everything else the administration has been discussing around financial relief, because I think the full picture is more interesting and more significant than any single program on its own. We have the $2,000 dividend payment discussion, we have the tariff refund proposals from various governors calling for $1,700 checks to households, we have this new retirement match proposal at $1,000 per year, and we have the Trump children's accounts at $1,000 per birth. None of these are the same thing. They work through different mechanisms, address different needs, and have different timelines. But taken together, they represent a coherent, if still developing strategy of using revenue from tariffs and other sources to put money into the hands of American workers and families in ways that are structured to build long-term financial resilience rather than just provide a one-time cash infusion. The retirement match proposal is arguably the most structurally sound of all of them because it requires participant engagement, it builds lasting wealth rather than providing temporary relief, and it addresses a real and well-documented gap in the American retirement system. For someone who is genuinely disciplined enough to put away $1,000 a year, the federal match doubles the impact of their effort immediately and then lets decades of compounding do the heavy lifting. That is a fundamentally different kind of economic intervention than a direct payment, and it is one that has lasting effects well beyond the year it is implemented. The honest bottom line right now is that this is a proposal, not a program. It was announced last night. There is no bill on the table yet. The funding mechanism has not been formally specified. The eligibility details have not been spelled out. And Congress still needs to act. But the reception it received, the bipartisan standing ovation in a deeply divided room, the straightforward popular appeal of helping working Americans save for retirement, and the political timing that makes passing it attractive before the midterms, all of that gives this proposal a better-than-average shot at actually becoming law. That is not a guarantee, and I will be watching this closely and bringing you every meaningful update as the details develop. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Would this program actually benefit you? Would you put in the $1,000 to get the match? I genuinely want to hear how you are thinking about this. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.